She was only 9 years old, small, quiet, and carrying a secret she was too afraid to tell. When she was called to testify, her voice shook. "I'll talk," she whispered, "if Rex barks." The room chuckled. The judge smiled patiently. But when the German shepherd opened his mouth, only a fragile, broken sound escaped. And that's when Officer David Hayes realized his dog wasn't barking. He was sending a signal. That moment would unravel a conspiracy, expose betrayal inside the department, and test the limits of loyalty between a man, a dog, and a child they both swore to protect. This is the story of courage spoken in silence. The story of Rex, the police dog who never needed words to tell the truth. By the end, one thing will stay with you. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that saves us all. The golden light of late afternoon spilled gently across the police training ground. Dust floated in the air like tiny sparks, glowing in the sunset, as if the world itself was pausing for a breath. The rhythmic sound of boots on gravel echoed between low fences and open fields. It wasn't the noise of soldiers, but of a man and his partner, a partnership bound by trust deeper than words. Officer David Hayes stood tall in his uniform, but his eyes were soft, the eyes of a man who had seen too much, and somehow learned to love again. At his side stood Rex, a proud German shepherd with eyes as sharp as amber glass. Every command David gave was answered with silent precision. Every gesture, a nod, a lift of a hand, a whistle. Rex understood without hesitation. The two moved as one, the kind of harmony that only comes from years of shared danger, shared silence, and shared purpose. Beyond the fence, a small figure watched quietly. Lily, a little girl with tangled brown hair and a backpack almost too big for her shoulders. She came every afternoon after school, sitting cross-legged on the grass, watching David and Rex train. Sometimes she'd giggle when Rex fetched a baton or rolled on command. And every time she laughed, the dog's ears would perk up, like he recognized her voice. David had grown used to her presence. He never asked her to leave, and she never interrupted. There was something sacred about the stillness she brought. Maybe because he knew her story. Lily's father had been a police officer too. A good one. Brave. He'd lost his life in the line of duty 2 years ago. When the training ended, Rex trotted over to her. The big dog slowed his steps as he approached, his tail wagging softly. Lily smiled, that shy, half-hidden smile children give when they're trying not to cry. She reached out her small hands, and Rex lowered his head, letting her touch his fur. "You were amazing today, Rex," she whispered, her voice trembling with admiration. Rex gave a low, satisfied grunt, pressing his head against her knees, as if to say thank you. David stood a few feet away, watching the two of them. Something in that sight, the little girl, the loyal dog, pierced through the armor he wore inside. For a moment, the grief he carried for his own fallen partner felt a little lighter. He walked over, squatting down beside them. "You know," he said gently, "he likes you more than he likes most officers here." Lily giggled softly. "Maybe because I bring him snacks." David smiled. "That might help," he said. Then his tone softened, his voice lowering, like he was speaking to something fragile. "But it's more than that. He knows when someone's got a good heart." The girl looked up at him, eyes the same deep brown as her father's had been. "Daddy used to say dogs can feel when you're sad," she murmured. Is that true? David nodded slowly. They feel everything, he said softly. The things we hide, the things we try not to say. Rex, he felt it when I lost my partner. I didn't speak for days, but he stayed right by me, never left my side. Sometimes, he paused, taking a breath. Sometimes, a dog's silence says more than any words could. Lily didn't answer. She just kept petting Rex, her little hand disappearing in his thick fur. The dog's breathing was calm, steady, a living heartbeat between them. The sky dimmed, shades of orange turning to purple. The other officers were packing up, laughter and chatter fading in the distance. David stayed behind, throwing a stick into the air. Rex caught it mid-flight with flawless precision. The girl clapped her hands, her eyes lighting up again. You think Rex could protect me? Lily asked suddenly. David looked at her new. Protect you? She nodded. Sometimes I get scared when Mom works late. The house gets quiet. He crouched lower, his voice firm but kind. Rex was trained to protect people who need it. And if he's ever near you, Lily, he looked at the dog, then back at her. He'll protect you, no matter what. Rex gave a short bark, almost as if he understood the promise being made. Lily smiled, but behind that smile was the kind of loneliness no child should have to carry. David felt it, the same hollow ache he had known since the night his partner died. And somehow, in that moment, he understood why she came to the training ground every day. Maybe she wasn't just watching a dog. Maybe she was watching courage, trying to remember what it looked like. He placed his hand on her shoulder. You remind me of your dad, you know. He used to say bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are. Lily looked down at Rex, her voice barely a whisper. Then maybe Rex is the bravest of all. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind the faint shimmer of twilight. David watched as Lily hugged Rex goodbye, her small arms barely reaching around his broad shoulders. The dog stood still, patient and proud, like a guardian carved from loyalty itself. As she walked away toward the road, her shadow stretched long across the field. David stayed there for a moment, his gaze distant. The memory of his fallen partner, the blood, the radio static, the helpless silence, flashed through his mind. He clenched his jaw, took a deep breath, and looked down at Rex. Guess it's just us again, boy, he said quietly. Rex pressed his head against David's leg, a gesture of comfort. It was a moment that said more than any words could. In that gentle twilight, man and dog stood side by side, two souls carrying different scars, bound by the same purpose. Neither of them knew what storms waited just beyond the horizon. But for now, the world was still, and love, simple, unspoken, eternal, hung in the air like the last light of the sun. The rain came suddenly. Not the soft drizzle of autumn, but a relentless storm that painted the streets in silver streaks and thundered against every rooftop in the city. Lightning tore through the clouds like veins of fire. The radio in David's patrol car crackled with static, before a voice cut through. Unit 42, respond to an explosion at East Dock Warehouse. Possible casualties. Proceed with caution. David's grip tightened on the wheel. Rex, seated beside him, lifted his head, alert. The red and blue lights from the dashboard reflected in the dog's eyes, sharp, ready, unwavering. They had been partners long enough for David to know what that look meant. Stay focused. Be ready. When they reached the docks, the world had already descended into chaos. Flames licked the edges of the night sky. The once silent warehouses stood like broken skeletons against the glow of fire. The smell of smoke and gasoline filled the air, thick, choking, and raw. David slammed the door shut, rain instantly soaking his uniform. "Rex, heel!" he commanded. The dog jumped out, paws hitting the wet concrete with precision. Firefighters shouted orders. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone screamed for help. David scanned the perimeter, his flashlight slicing through the smoke. That's when he saw her. A woman collapsed near a pile of debris, half buried under splintered wood and shattered glass. "Got a survivor!" David yelled, rushing forward. Rex followed, barking sharply, alerting nearby officers. The woman's face was pale beneath the grime, her hair tangled and wet. David brushed the mud away from her ID card clipped to her coat. L. Anderson, investigative journalist. His chest tightened. Lily's mother. He knelt, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. A faint pulse. She was alive. "Hang on, ma'am," he whispered, his voice trembling against the sound of rain. Rex barked again. A warning bark this time. Short. Urgent. His body stiffened, head turning toward the shadows beyond the collapsed beams. David turned, just in time to see a silhouette darting between the flames. Tall, fast, disappearing into the smoke. The man's coat flared like wings of darkness. "Stop! Police!" David shouted, pulling his flashlight up. But the beam only caught smoke. The figure was gone. Then, the world exploded again. A second blast, smaller, closer, ripped through the floor behind him. The shockwave threw David to the ground. His ears rang, heat burned through the air. Rex's bark cut through the chaos. Fierce, desperate. When David opened his eyes, all he saw was fire and motion. The roof above them groaned, ready to collapse. He crawled toward the woman again, pulling at the beams with bloodied hands. Rex grabbed her sleeve with his teeth, tugging gently but urgently, trying to free her. "Good boy, that's it. Pull!" David grunted through the pain. Together, they dragged her out of the collapsing section, just as it gave way behind them, sending sparks and splinters into the night. They stumbled out into the open, rain hissing as it met the flames. David pressed his hand against his side, warm blood spreading beneath his fingers. Shrapnel. It burned, but he didn't care. He looked at the woman, still breathing, still unconscious. "Dispatch, we've got 1 survivor," he gasped into his radio. "Need immediate—" Before he could finish, Rex began barking again. This time it wasn't a warning. It was fury, the kind of sound that came when danger wasn't just near. It was watching. David turned. Through the rain, on a far rooftop, he thought he saw movement, the glint of something metallic. A scope. Then, nothing. Another thunderclap. Or was it a shot? He couldn't tell. His instincts screamed. "Down!" he shouted, covering the woman's body with his own. Rex growled low. His eyes locked on the darkness beyond. For several long seconds, time seemed to freeze. Only the rain moved, falling between life and death. Then the shadows receded. Whoever was there, if anyone, was gone. When backup finally arrived, the fire had swallowed most of the evidence. Several bodies were found, all burned beyond recognition. No clear suspects, no trace of the mysterious figure, and no one had seen the shooter. As paramedics lifted Lily's mother onto a stretcher, David staggered to his feet, his arm bleeding freely. Rex stayed by his side, pressing his muzzle against David's sleeve, whining softly. "It's all right, boy," David muttered, though his voice shook. "We got her out. She's alive." But even as he said it, a part of him knew something about this wasn't right. The first explosion, the fleeing figure, the missing evidence. It was too clean, too deliberate. He looked down at Rex, whose fur was matted with ash and rain. The dog's eyes darted toward the burning warehouse, scanning, remembering, understanding. "Yeah," David whispered. "You feel it too, don't you?" The sound of distant sirens grew louder, but so did the silence between them. That heavy silence that only comes when the world has shifted, and you don't yet know why. The paramedics shouted for David to get checked out, but he waved them off, watching as they loaded the unconscious woman into the ambulance. Her face was peaceful now, but behind that peace was the chaos of everything she'd seen, and everything she might have known. As the ambulance doors shut, David's vision blurred. His knees gave way. He reached out instinctively and felt Rex's head press under his arm, steadying him. He looked down, smiling weakly. "Still got me, huh?" Rex whined softly, licking the blood from his wrist. In that moment, amid the ash, the sirens, and the rain, David realized something. The fire was just the beginning. Somewhere in the distance, under the sound of thunder, a darker truth was hiding. And whatever it wasn't finished with them yet. Rex leaned against him, warm and solid, a living anchor in a storm that was only just beginning. The night swallowed the last flicker of flame as the rain fell harder, washing blood and soot into the gutters. Two silhouettes, one man, one dog, stood beneath the flashing red lights, their shadows merging into one. And somewhere deep in David's chest, the pain of his wound pulsed like a warning, one that whispered what his heart already knew. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. It had been 3 weeks since the night the world fell apart. 3 weeks since the rain, the fire, the sirens, since a little girl's laughter had been replaced by silence. The safe house sat on a quiet street, far from the chaos of the city. From the outside, it looked ordinary, a small, rented home with white curtains and a modest porch. But inside, every corner carried the weight of grief. The air was heavy with the sound of nothing. No TV, no humming refrigerator, no conversation. Only the ticking of a wall clock, marking time that refused to move forward. Lily sat by the window, knees pulled close to her chest, her small hands holding a crumpled drawing. She had been there for hours, watching the rain slide down the glass like tiny rivers. Her eyes were open, but distant, lost somewhere far beyond the gray sky. David watched her from the kitchen doorway, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He had seen trauma before, grown men who couldn't sleep after what they'd witnessed. But seeing it in a child, it broke something deeper. The door creaked softly. A familiar sound of paws against the wooden floor followed. Rex entered, tail low, head tilted. The big German shepherd moved carefully, almost reverently, as if he understood that this house was a fragile place. When Lily saw him, a faint spark of light passed through her eyes. Not quite a smile, but something close. She unfolded herself from the window seat and sat on the floor, waiting. Rex walked over, his nails clicking softly, then lowered himself beside her. Without a word, she reached out and ran her fingers through his fur. For a long moment, they stayed that way, a girl who couldn't speak, and a dog who didn't need to. David leaned against the wall, watching. The scene filled him with a quiet ache, part sorrow, part gratitude. Every day, he brought Rex here. Every day, Rex found a way to reach the girl when no one else could. He stepped closer. "Hey, kiddo," he said gently. "Rex missed you." Lily didn't answer. Her eyes remained on the floor, tracing circles in Rex's fur. David crouched beside her. "You know, he's been restless," he said softly. "Keeps looking at the door every night. I think he's waiting for your voice." Still, nothing. Just silence, soft and suffocating. David sighed. He wasn't sure if she even heard him, but he kept talking anyway. Sometimes words were like small lights. You didn't know which one might flicker to life. "Your mom's stable now," he said quietly. "Still in the hospital. They say she's a fighter, just like you." Lily's hand paused. Her lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She hadn't cried since that night. Rex lifted his head slightly, sensing her tension. He pressed his muzzle against her knee, letting out a low whine. That sound, low, gentle, protective, broke something in the silence. Lily's shoulders shook, and for the first time in weeks, a tear fell. David's throat tightened. He looked away, pretending to busy himself with his jacket. "He doesn't like it when people are sad," he murmured. "Makes him worry." Lily wiped her tears and nodded faintly. Then, reaching for a colored pencil on the table, she began to draw on the back of her crumpled paper. Rex stayed perfectly still, watching her hand move. After a few minutes, she turned the paper around. It was a picture of Rex, big and brave, standing tall, his mouth open in a bark. But above him, she had written, in careful block letters, "Shh." David stared at it for a long time. His pulse quickened, though he couldn't say why. He knelt beside her. "That's a good drawing," he said softly. "Why, shh?" Lily didn't answer. She simply lowered her eyes and hugged the paper to her chest. David exhaled slowly. He didn't press further. Whatever she had seen that night, it was still too heavy for her to speak aloud. Later that afternoon, a psychiatrist from the department, Dr. Harris, came to buy. A kind woman in her 40s. She spoke softly and carried herself like someone used to fragile hearts. She sat across from Lily, her tone gentle but professional. "Hi, sweetheart. My name's Emily. I heard you're staying with Officer David and his friend Rex." Lily looked at Rex, then gave a tiny nod. "That's a beautiful drawing you've got," Dr. Harris said, her eyes landing on the folded paper. "Did you draw that today?" Lily hesitated, then nodded again. "I love German shepherds," Harris continued. "They're brave, aren't they? They protect the people they love." At that, Lily looked up, her eyes glistening. She whispered something so soft it was barely a sound. David couldn't hear, but Rex's ears twitched. "What was that, honey?" the psychiatrist asked kindly. Lily shook her head, tucking the paper behind her back. Her small fingers trembled. After a few more, gentle attempts, Harris gave David a look, the kind of look that said, "Give her time." When she left, she said quietly, "She's not just scared, David. She's protecting someone, or something. Be patient." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, David sat outside on the porch with Rex lying at his feet. The rain had stopped, leaving the world heavy and still. David rubbed the scar on his arm, the one from the explosion. "She's just a kid," he whispered. "No kid should have to hold that kind of fear." Rex looked up, eyes glimmering in the porch light. He gave a low, understanding huff. David smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know you'd fix it if you could." In the quiet, the house behind them seemed almost alive, breathing in slow, uncertain rhythms. The sound of the clock ticking inside was the only sign that time hadn't stopped completely. As David stood to go back in, he looked once more at the small figure asleep under a blanket, Rex curled protectively beside her. For the first time in weeks, the girl's face looked peaceful. Her hand rested on Rex's paw, small, trusting, safe. David whispered, almost to himself, "You're her anchor, buddy." Rex didn't move, but as the light flickered across his fur, it felt like the whole room exhaled. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of something sacred. And in that silence, the bond between them deepened. One that didn't need words, didn't need healing yet. Just being there was enough. For now. The days that followed felt heavier than the rain-soaked air outside. Inside the precinct, the usual chatter of radios and ringing phones was replaced by a quiet tension, the kind that hums beneath the surface when something isn't right. David sat at his desk, staring at the crime report from the East Dock explosion. The words blurred together, lines repeating themselves in ways they shouldn't. According to the official statement, the cause was a gas leak leading to accidental detonation. But David had been there. He'd smelled the chemicals. He'd seen the burn patterns. There was nothing accidental about it. He flipped through the attached witness list. One name stood out. Mark Danner, warehouse security guard, first responder. David had interviewed him 2 days after the incident. Danner was nervous but cooperative. Said he saw someone flee the scene before the second blast. But now, his report was missing. His name wasn't even in the system. David frowned. He checked again. Nothing. Rex lay nearby, head resting on his paws. He lifted his eyes, watching David closely, reading his unease the way only he could. "Something's off, buddy," David muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Someone's cleaning house." The words hung in the air, cold and real. That afternoon, David took his findings to his superior, Captain Monroe, a man whose sharp suits and colder stare said he'd been in the job too long. Monroe listened quietly, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Sir," David said carefully, "the reports don't match the evidence. The guard's gone. His statement, too. And the lab's preliminary findings on the residue." "Enough!" Monroe's tone cut through the room like a blade. "You've done your part, Hayes. The explosion was an accident. Case closed." David blinked. "With all due respect, sir, it doesn't add up. There's—" Monroe leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Let it go. That's an order." For a moment, silence. The ticking of the office clock was the only sound. David clenched his jaw. "Is that what we do now? Just look the other way?" Monroe's voice dropped to a whisper. "You've been through hell, Hayes. I get it. You see ghosts where there aren't any. Take a few days off. Be with the girl, walk your dog." The words were meant to sound kind, but they landed like a warning. David left the office with his pulse pounding. Outside, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. The corridors of the precinct suddenly felt narrower, the lights dimmer. He could feel eyes following him. Or maybe he was just imagining it. He drove home in silence. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, ears twitching at every noise. David could feel it too, that instinctual tension that meant danger wasn't gone, only waiting. That night, long after Lily had gone to bed, David stood in the backyard beneath the cold moonlight. The grass was wet beneath his boots, and the world around him was quiet. Too quiet. He reached down, patted Rex's neck. "All right, boy," he whispered. "If they want to play shadows, we'll be ready." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small clicker, a soundless device used during Kaon training. Over the years, he and Rex had developed dozens of signals: a tilt of the head for stay, a flick of the wrist for search, a whistle for attack. But tonight, David wanted to go further, deeper. "New code," he said softly, "for when we can't speak." Rex watched him, eyes glinting in the half-light. David raised 2 fingers and clicked twice. Short, sharp, silent. Rex tilted his head. David clicked again, then placed his hand over his mouth. "Mute," he said quietly. "If you hear this, or if I make this sign." He touched his lips, then spread his hand outward. "It means we're being watched. Don't make a sound. Don't react. Just understand." Rex gave a low, rumbling breath. Not quite a bark, not quite a sigh, but it was acknowledgement. David smiled faintly. "Good boy." They practiced for hours. Subtle hand gestures, eye contact, small shifts of movement. It wasn't standard training, but it was something more powerful, a language only they shared. At one point, David crouched beside Rex, rubbing the dog's fur between his fingers. His hand trembled slightly, though his voice stayed calm. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't trust anyone else right now. Just you." Rex nudged his hand, then rested his head against David's shoulder. The night deepened. A breeze rustled the leaves. Somewhere far off, a car door slammed, sharp, echoing. David's body went rigid. He turned off the porch light, letting the darkness swallow them. Rex stayed still, eyes locked toward the sound. After a long moment, nothing. Just the whisper of wind and the hum of the distant city. But David knew better. Rate, slow. He could feel it. The presence of something unseen. Someone had been watching. He crouched low, whispering into Rex's ear. "From now on, we stay quiet. Always." Rex's tail flicked once in response. Hours later, David sat at the table, reviewing the files again under the dim light of a single lamp. He marked inconsistencies in red, timelines that didn't match, witness statements that contradicted each other. Every page told the same story. Someone inside the department was rewriting the truth. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion seeping through his bones. The only sound was Rex's slow breathing at his feet. David whispered, "If I ever can't speak, you'll know what to do, won't you?" Rex lifted his head. Their eyes met. One human, one animal. Yet in that moment, the understanding between them was absolute. David leaned forward, resting his forehead against Rex's. His voice cracked, low and raw. "You saved that girl. You saved me. And if this goes deeper than I think, we might need saving again." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the horizon. It wasn't raining yet, but the air was thick, electric, charged with the promise of a storm. David turned off the light. The room fell into darkness, except for the faint glow of the street lamp through the blinds. Rex didn't move. He just watched the door, eyes steady, body still, waiting for whatever came next. In that silence, man and dog shared a truth that words couldn't hold. The world they trusted was starting to rot from within. And soon, both of them would have to choose between following orders or following their instincts. The day of the trial arrived cloaked in gray clouds, the kind that swallow the sun and hang low, pressing against the city like a weight that refuses to lift. The courthouse stood tall against the gloom, its stone facade slick from an early morning rain. News vans lined the curb. Reporters whispered into microphones. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind that no amount of air conditioning could cut through. Every seat in the gallery was full. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised. Lawyers shuffled papers in silence. Even the ticking clock seemed hesitant, as if afraid to interrupt. At the front of the room sat the defendant, Victor Harlan, a man whose wealth and influence reached into every dark corner of the city. His reputation gleamed in public, but David knew better. Behind those polished suits and calm eyes lived rot, the kind of rot that fed on fear and silence. David stood near the back, his uniform crisp, posture rigid. Rex sat beside him, perfectly still, his amber eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. To anyone else, he looked calm, but David could feel it. The faint tension in the leash, the almost imperceptible growl in Rex's chest. The dog sensed danger before it had a name. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The shuffle of feet echoed like distant thunder. When they sat again, the prosecutor stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, "we call our final witness, Miss Lily Anderson." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. From a side door, Lily stepped in, smaller than the heavy oak door behind her, her pale face half hidden by the oversized jacket she wore. Her steps were light, uncertain. "Time 300 pmas." David's heart twisted as he watched her walk. The same little girl who once laughed at the training field, now walking into a battlefield of adults and lies. Rex's ears perked. His tail brushed once against David's leg, as if to say, "She's here." Lily took the stand. The bailiff swore her in, but her voice was barely audible. The judge leaned forward. "It's all right, young lady. Take your time." The prosecutor smiled gently. "Lily, I know this is hard, but can you tell us what you remember from the night of the explosion?" The room went silent. Lily's fingers clutched the edge of the witness stand. Her eyes darted to the crowd, to the cameras, to the defendant's cold stare, and finally to David and Rex at the back. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence stretched thin, trembling like glass. One of the reporters coughed softly. Somewhere a chair creaked. The judge shifted in his seat. Lily swallowed hard. Her eyes shimmered, her voice barely a whisper. I can't." The prosecutor frowned, softening his tone. "That's all right, sweetheart. We can—" She shook her head. "No, I can't." Her voice trembled, then fell away entirely. The judge sighed. "Miss Anderson, if you don't testify, we may not be able to—" Then, quietly, she said something no one expected. "I can't, unless Rex barks." For a second, no one understood. A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom, soft, nervous, inappropriate. The defense attorney smirked. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. But David froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. The air left his lungs. Rex bark. The words echoed in his mind like a memory. He remembered that night in the backyard, his hand on Rex's head, his voice low and certain. If I ever can't speak, you'll know what to do. David's eyes locked on Lily. She wasn't smiling. There was no playfulness in her tone. Her gaze was steady, terrified, and pleading. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was signaling for help. Rex shifted beside him, muscles tightening. He could sense it too. The unease, the wrongness. The judge leaned forward again. I'm sorry, young lady. Did you say the dog needs to bark? Lily nodded faintly. He'll help me be brave, she whispered. He always does. The judge glanced toward the prosecutor, uncertain. Is this some kind of therapy aid? David cleared his throat and stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, Officer Hayes, K-9 unit. The witness and my partner have a connection. If it helps her testify, I can bring him closer. The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Proceed. David walked Rex slowly toward the front. Every step echoed across the marble floor, magnified by the silence. The dog's nails clicked softly, steady and calm, though David's heart was racing. When they reached the stand, Rex sat beside Lily, his head level with her small hands. She reached out, trembling, and touched his fur. For the first time since entering the room, her breathing slowed. David stood behind them, trying to mask the pounding in his chest. He scanned the crowd, journalists scribbling, cameras flashing, and then his gaze met Victor Harlan's. The man's expression was smooth, unreadable, but behind those eyes, something flickered, a flicker of recognition and fear. The prosecutor took a cautious step forward. All right, Lily. When you're ready. Lily looked down at Rex. Her hand made a small motion, almost imperceptible, the same gesture she used during their visits. The signal to speak. Rex tilted his head. David felt the shift, a tremor in the air. But before the dog could make a sound, the defense attorney rose. Your Honor, this is absurd. A dog. Sit down, counselor, the judge barked. Let the witness proceed. The room fell into absolute stillness. Lily looked up, her voice fragile as glass. Please, let him bark. Just once. The judge sighed. Very well. David hesitated. His mind raced. She's asking for something more. Not a bark, a signal. Rex waited. The silence was unbearable. Lily gave the smallest nod. And then, with a soft, broken sound, Rex opened his mouth. It wasn't a full bark, not the strong, confident sound he was trained for. It was quiet, strained, almost like a whisper. A bark caught in the throat, cut short by something unseen. The room froze. A few people chuckled awkwardly. The defense attorney rolled his eyes. But David's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. He'd trained it himself. The mute bark. It meant danger. His eyes met Rex's, and in that instant, he understood. They were being watched. The courtroom wasn't safe. The camera flashbulbs went off again. Somewhere in the crowd, a man lowered his phone, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. David's heart hammered. He could feel it, the story shifting, darkness creeping in. Lily wasn't safe. None of them were. And as the sound of that broken bark faded into the heavy silence of the courtroom, David realized the real trial wasn't happening on the stand. It was happening in the shadows. The courtroom was a cathedral of stillness. Even the air seemed afraid to move. Lily sat frozen on the witness stand, her small hand still resting on Rex's back. The dog didn't shift or blink. His amber eyes were locked on hers, steady, unwavering, the way a guardian looks at someone it would die for. The judge leaned forward, his tone cautious. "You may proceed." Every camera, every pen, every pair of eyes turned toward them. The hum of electricity from the overhead lights grew louder, sharper. Somewhere in the back row, a flash burst across Lily's pale face. She didn't flinch. Her fingers twitched. A small movement, deliberate, controlled. It was the same motion David had seen before. The signal. Speak. Rex lifted his head slowly, as though the weight of the moment pressed against his throat. He opened his mouth, chest expanding, ready to release the sound that would break the silence. But what came out wasn't a bark. It was something softer, smaller, a broken whisper, caught halfway between air and sound. A bark that wasn't a bark at all. It was almost silence. The noise echoed once, faintly, against the marble walls. Then, nothing. For a few seconds, no one moved. The entire courtroom was suspended, a living photograph of confusion. A woman in the front row gasped. Someone let out a nervous laugh. The defense attorney smirked. But David didn't laugh. He felt it immediately, the cold hand of dread crawling up his spine. That sound, that half-bark, that muted cry. He'd trained it himself. Rex's mute bark, a signal only the two of them knew. "We're being watched. Don't speak." David's stomach turned to stone. His breath caught. His eyes darted toward the gallery, scanning faces, searching for the threat. Then he saw it. In the far corner, a man in a dark suit. No notepad, no phone, just stillness. His gaze wasn't on the witness or the defendant. It was on David. Their eyes met. Cold, measured, a warning. David looked away, forcing his breathing to stay steady. He couldn't let anyone see the fear. Not now. Lily looked at him. She knew. Her chin quivered, but she didn't cry. She sat taller, braver than anyone in the room. The judge cleared his throat. "Well, that was unexpected." The defense attorney rose. "Your Honor, are we truly allowing—" But his voice faded into the background. For David, the world had narrowed, sound gone, sight tunneled, until all that remained was Rex, Lily, and the meaning pulsing between them. Rex had lowered his head slightly now, body taut. He wasn't scared. He was protecting. Lily's hand trembled on his fur. Her lips parted, but her eyes flicked toward the shadowy man. She froze. And suddenly, David understood everything. This little girl had seen something that night, something powerful men wanted buried, something her mother had died to protect. And now, even here, the same darkness had followed them. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Miss Anderson, it's okay. You can speak now." Lily's lips moved, but no sound came. Her eyes filled with tears. She turned toward David, searching for safety. David forced a calm expression, It's all right, Lily, he whispered. You did great. But inside, his heart was pounding so loud it hurt. He knew they were no longer safe. The judge sighed. We'll take a brief recess. His gavel struck wood. Court adjourned until further notice. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Instantly, the room came alive. Reporters whispering, officers moving, chairs scraping. But amid the chaos, David stayed frozen, eyes locked on Rex. The dog stood tall, gaze fixed on the exit. His ears twitched. He could sense what David couldn't yet see. Danger approaching. Lily climbed down from the stand. David met her halfway, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did good, he said softly. She shook her head. He didn't bark. David forced a smile. He did, he said. Just in his own way. Her brow furrowed, but there was trust in her eyes. Rex brushed against her leg, leaning slightly, protective, present, unyielding. As they left the courtroom, David glanced back one last time. The man in the dark suit was gone. Only the echo of that silent bark lingered, faint, haunting, impossible to forget. Outside, the sky had darkened again, clouds heavy with rain. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions. David didn't answer. He just kept walking. One hand steady on Lily's shoulder, the other gripping Rex's leash. What does it mean? Lily whispered. When Rex barks like that? David hesitated. His throat tightened. It means, he said softly, he's telling us to be careful. Lily nodded. Then, we listened to him. The dog looked up at them both, silent and watchful. And as thunder rolled across the city once more, David knew this was only the beginning. That quiet, broken sound inside the courtroom hadn't been weakness. It had been a warning. A message meant only for those who could understand it. A bark that carried more power than any scream. Because sometimes, the loudest truth is the one spoken in silence. Scene 4.1. The warning unfolds. The night after the hearing, the city slept beneath a heavy sky. A thin mist curled through the empty streets, wrapping around the streetlights like ghosts reluctant to leave. Inside David's apartment, there was no rest. The light over the kitchen table burned dimly, throwing long shadows across case files and coffee cups. Rex lay on the floor, breathing shallow, head on his paws. Every few minutes, he coughed. Not from sickness, but from pain. David sat hunched over, reading reports, chasing ghosts through lines of text. No matter how deep he dug, everything led back to the same hollow truth. The case had been buried. The warning in the courtroom wouldn't leave his mind. He looked at Rex. You tried to tell me, didn't you? Rex lifted his head slightly, eyes tired but alert. David's phone buzzed. Hayes, he said. David, it's Dr. Morales. The vet's voice was tight. Rex's scans came in. His vocal cords. They're damaged, not from age or strain. It's consistent with exposure to a high-frequency pulse. David's blood ran cold. You're saying someone did this to him? Morales hesitated. It wasn't an accident. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. David's voice broke, a whisper. They didn't just silence him. They erased his voice. He knelt beside Rex. They hurt you to keep you quiet, he said. But you still spoke. You still told me. Rex leaned against him, his silent strength louder than any cry. David's mind sharpened. the realization cutting deep. The explosion, the missing files, the silence, all of it connected. He rose, voice steady, eyes burning. They didn't count on one thing, he said softly. They didn't count on you. Rex stood, limping slightly but proud. David grabbed his badge, his jacket, and whispered, "Come on, partner. We're not done yet." Together they stepped into the rain. The city lights blurred through the downpour, red, white, gold, reflections of the chaos ahead. David's voice was quiet but resolute. "They tried to silence you, buddy, but they forgot. Truth doesn't need a voice to be heard." Rex blinked once, slow and sure. David smiled faintly. "Let's make some noise." As the car disappeared into the rain-drenched streets, the faint reflection of red and blue lights flickered across the puddles. Not from sirens, but from the quiet fire of two souls who refused to give up. The warning had been given. Now came the reckoning. The night after the hearing, the city slept beneath a heavy sky. A thin mist curled through the empty streets, wrapping around the streetlights like ghosts reluctant to leave. But inside David's small apartment, there was no rest. The light over his kitchen table burned dimly, throwing long shadows across stacks of case files, photographs, and half-empty coffee cups. Rex lay on the floor nearby, his breathing shallow, his head resting on his paws. Every few minutes, he coughed, not from sickness, but from pain. David sat hunched over the table, his uniform jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled up. He had been reading for hours, combing through every medical report, every police memo, every line of evidence tied to the East Dock explosion. But no matter how deep he dug, everything led back to the same hollow truth. The case had been buried. And now, the warning in the courtroom, the mute bark, wouldn't leave his mind. He looked up from his notes, his gaze settling on Rex. "You tried to tell me, didn't you?" he murmured. Rex lifted his head slightly, eyes tired but alert. David's phone buzzed on the table, its vibration loud in the quiet room. He hesitated before answering. "Hayes," he said softly. "David, it's Dr. Morales," came a voice. "The department's K-9 veterinarian. You brought Rex in for his regular checkup last week. I got his scans back today. There's something I think you should see." A chill spread through David's chest. "What is it?" Morales hesitated. "It's his vocal cords. They're damaged, not from age or strain. It's consistent with exposure to a high-frequency sonic pulse, something designed to cause pain or trauma to a dog's throat." David straightened in his chair, heart pounding, rate slow. "You're saying someone did this to him?" "It wasn't an accident," Morales said. "I've seen this before. Devices used in illegal silencing methods. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "I'm sorry, David." The line went quiet. David whispered, almost to himself. They didn't just silence him. They tried to erase his voice. He ended the call and sat motionless, the words echoing in his head. He looked down at Rex, the loyal dog who had warned him, even when he could barely make a sound. Something inside him broke. He pushed his chair back, knelt beside Rex, and ran his hand over the dog's fur. "They hurt you to keep you quiet," he said, voice trembling. "But you still spoke. You still told me." Rex leaned against him, pressing his weight gently into David's chest. His eyes, those same amber eyes that had seen fire, darkness, and loyalty, never left his handler's face. David swallowed hard, guilt twisting in his gut. "I should have known sooner," he whispered. "I should have protected you better." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. David's mind raced, images flashing like lightning. The shadow in the courtroom, the man in the dark suit, Captain Monroe's warning to let it go. Every piece was part of something bigger, something rotten. He moved back to the table, flipping through files until he found it. A requisition order for training equipment, signed off by Monroe himself. The vendor? A shell company connected to Victor Harlan's network. David felt the blood drain from his face. "You son of a—" He slammed the folder shut. Rex lifted his head, watching silently. "They set us up," David muttered, pacing the room. "They silenced witnesses, erased files, and when they couldn't shut you up, they tried to break you." He stopped, his reflection flickering in the rain-streaked window. A man haunted by duty and loss. "They didn't count on one thing, did they?" He turned to Rex. "They didn't count on you." Rex stood, tail low but steady, his presence filling the room like gravity itself. David knelt again, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. His voice broke, the words falling between them like a vow. "You still found a way to warn us," he whispered. "You're braver than any of us." For a long time he stayed there, man and dog bound by something unspoken. The rain outside grew heavier, drowning out the noise of the world. But inside, David's thoughts sharpened into something cold, deliberate, unstoppable. He knew now this wasn't just about an explosion. It was about power, silence, and control. It was about how far men like Harlan would go to bury the truth. He stood, grabbed his jacket, reached for his badge. "Come on, partner," he said softly. "We're not done yet." Rex limped slightly as he followed, throat sore, but eyes gleaming with fierce determination. They stepped out into the rain together. The city lights blurred through the downpour, red, white, gold, reflections of the chaos ahead. David walked with purpose, replaying every unanswered question, every lie disguised as protocol. By the time they reached the car, his decision was made. He wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't going to obey orders. And if the system wanted silence, then he and Rex would be the noise it couldn't contain. David started the engine. The wipers squealed across the windshield. Rex sat beside him, staring out the window, a soldier still standing after every battle. David glanced at him, voice quiet, but sure. "They tried to silence you, buddy, but they forgot. Truth doesn't need a voice to be heard." Rex looked at him, blinking once, slowly, in agreement. David smiled faintly. "Let's make some noise." And as the car disappeared into the rain-drenched streets, the faint reflection of red and blue lights flickered across the puddles, not from sirens, but from the quiet fire of two souls who refused to give up. The warning had been given. Now came the reckoning. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It came in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes furious, but always there, washing the city clean while leaving the truth buried beneath its surface. David hadn't been home since the night he found out about Rex's injuries. His apartment lights stayed off. His phone stayed silent. He lived now between his car, the precinct, and the shadows of the city. Every night, he returned to the same place, an abandoned parking structure overlooking the docks. It was here that he had begun watching, listening, piecing together the fragments of corruption that ran deeper than he'd ever imagined. His superior, Captain Monroe, was at the center of it all. The same man who had told him to let it go. The man who had signed the requisition order that led to Rex's pain. David sat inside his car, a small camera in his hand, the lens pointed at a distant warehouse below. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he watched as Monroe stepped out of a black sedan. Another man joined him, tall, broad-shouldered, the unmistakable silhouette of Victor Harlan. David's jaw clenched. He adjusted the focus. The lens caught it all. The handshake, the exchange of an envelope, the quiet laughter between two men who thought no one was watching. David's hand shook slightly as he pressed record. "This is it," he whispered. "This is how it ends." Rex, sitting in the back seat, gave a soft rumble, sensing his handler's tension. David glanced back. "I know, buddy. Just a little longer." For a moment, lightning split the sky, a flash of silver-white that illuminated everything. When it faded, David caught sight of something else in the rearview mirror. Headlights. 2 sets. Approaching fast. He frowned. "That's not patrol." Before he could react, the side mirror exploded in a spray of glass. Gunfire tore through the night. "Ambush!" David ducked, grabbing his sidearm. "Stay down!" Rex barked once, sharp and defiant, as bullets riddled the car doors. David kicked the door open, rolling onto the wet pavement. Rain poured down in sheets, blurring the world into chaos. 2 figures advanced from the darkness, their movements too familiar. Officers. His own men. "Hayes!" one of them shouted. "You should have listened to the captain!" David fired back, muzzle flash lighting his face. A bullet grazed his shoulder. Pain seared through him. But he kept moving. He used the car for cover. Rex darted low through the rain, circling behind the attackers. He moved like a shadow, silent, swift, precise. A scream cut through the storm as one of the men fell, knocked off balance by 80 pounds of fury. Rex's jaws clamped down on his wrist, the gun clattering onto the pavement. "Rex, back!" David shouted, voice raw. The dog obeyed instantly, retreating just as another burst of gunfire ripped through the air. A bullet struck the ground inches from David's knee. He ducked behind a pillar, whispering, "They're police. God! They're really police." Then silence. Just the rain. He peeked around the corner. One attacker down, the other gone. "Rex!" he called softly. The dog trotted toward him, soaked, panting, eyes bright. Then, a sound. Behind them. David spun. The missing man stepped out of the shadows, weapon raised. Time slowed. The gun fired. A deafening crack that cut through the chill. Rain. But Rex moved faster. The German shepherd lunged, pushing David to the ground. The bullet hit, but not where it was meant to. It tore through Rex's side, blood blooming against his fur like dark petals in the storm. "Rex! No! No, no, stay with me!" David pressed against the wound, his hands trembling, blood spilling between his fingers. Rex's chest rose and fell unevenly, his eyes, still fierce, locked onto David's face. "Don't you do this!" David choked. "Don't you dare leave me!" Rex gave a faint whimper, not of pain, but reassurance. His paw shifted weakly, pressing against David's arm, as if to say it's all right. David's tears mixed with the rain. "You saved me," he whispered. "You always save me." Rex's breathing grew slower. His body relaxed, heavy against the wet ground. But his eyes never lost their fire. They stayed fixed on David, unbroken, unwavering, until the very last. David bent closer, voice breaking. "You kept your promise, buddy." Rex exhaled one last time, his head resting in David's trembling hands. The rain fell harder. The street around them glowed with reflections of red and blue lights, not from sirens, but from the distant city beyond. David stayed there, cradling him, long after the world went silent again. Somewhere behind him, the warehouse lights flickered, one going out, then another. The shadows swallowed the evidence, the bodies, the proof of betrayal. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the stillness in his arms, the quiet hero who had given everything without a word. For the first time in years, David's heart truly broke. "Time for our 100 moose." He pressed his forehead against Rex's, whispering through the sobs, "You were the best of us." Lightning flashed one final time, freezing the moment in white light. The man, the fallen dog, the storm that bore witness. And when the thunder came, it sounded almost like a bark, faint, distant, echoing through the rain. Winter had come and gone before David stepped back into the light. Months passed in fragments. Hospital rooms, white walls, nights haunted by rain, and memories of a bark that would never sound again. His arm healed slowly, but his heart, not yet. He still woke to the same sound each night, the echo of that last breath, the last look in Rex's eyes. But the pain had purpose now, because the truth, like Rex, had refused to die. The recordings David had risked everything to capture were finally in the right hands. The images of Monroe and Harlan meeting in secret, exchanging money, covering evidence, all of it had come to light. Internal Affairs launched an investigation that shook the department to its core. Monroe was stripped of his badge. Harlan's empire began to crumble under the weight of its own lies. And now, on this quiet morning, David walked once more through the courthouse doors. This time not as a guard, but as a witness to the truth his partner had given everything to protect. The courtroom was full again, but the air was different. Still heavy, yes, but charged with something cleaner. Honest. Lily sat at the front, hands folded neatly on the stand. She had grown since that terrible night, taller, stronger, her eyes brighter. The fear that once lived there had softened into something braver. David stood at the back of the room, a black band wrapped around his sleeve, a symbol of mourning and of pride. As the judge entered, the murmurs faded. Everyone rose. Then, one by one, they sat. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, then faced the court. "Your Honor," he began, "we now have conclusive evidence connecting Victor Harlan and Captain Monroe to the East Dock. Explosion and subsequent cover-up." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The defense tried to object, but the judge silenced them with a stern glance. "Furthermore," the prosecutor continued, "we have testimony from a minor witness who, until recently, was too afraid to speak. But today, she wishes to tell the truth." He turned to Lily. Her fingers trembled for a moment, but she took a deep breath. "My name is Lily Anderson," she began. "I was there the night of the explosion. My mom was hurt. I saw the man who did it. I saw the one who told him to." Her voice didn't waver. The silence that followed was absolute. David's throat tightened. He could hardly breathe. The prosecutor nodded gently. "And what made you decide to speak now, Lily?" She hesitated, her eyes finding David's in the crowd, then falling to the empty space beside him, where Rex should have been. She smiled softly, a single tear shining on her cheek. "Because Rex told me not to be afraid." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Even the judge leaned back, blinking hard behind his glasses. Around the courtroom, people shifted, hands moving to wipe eyes discreetly. David closed his eyes, his hand unconsciously brushing the badge on his chest. Rex's old tag, polished and worn. The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you, Lily." He turned toward the judge. "With the court's permission, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence." The lights dimmed. A projector whirred to life. On the screen appeared grainy footage, captured from David's camera the night of the ambush. The rain poured down. Flashes of lightning illuminated the chaos. The images were shaky, frantic, but clear enough to show everything. Rate slow. The corrupt officers, the gunfire, the moment Rex leapt in front of the bullet. Gasps filled the room again. On the screen, David's voice cracked as he screamed for help. Then, the frame froze on Rex's face, eyes fierce, body broken, still standing between his handler and danger. A hush fell so deep it felt sacred. Even the judge's gavel trembled in his hand. "Turn it off," he whispered. "Please." When the lights came back, no one spoke. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the projector winding down. Then, slowly, the judge removed his glasses. "This court finds Victor Harlan and Captain Monroe guilty on all counts: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and the attempted silencing of federal evidence." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even applause. Cameras flashed again, but David didn't see any of it. He was already lost in the memory of that last night. He could still feel the rain. He could still feel Rex's heartbeat fading beneath his hands. A tear rolled down his cheek, unnoticed. Lily stood from the witness stand and walked straight toward him, ignoring the cameras. She wrapped her small arms around his waist, holding tight. "You kept your promise," she whispered. David's voice broke. "No, Lily, he did." Outside the courthouse, the crowd gathered. Reporters, officers, civilians. The city that had once turned away now stood to listen. And though the case was closed, the story wasn't one of victory. It was one of sacrifice. As David and Lily stepped into the sunlight, he felt something shift inside him. Not peace, exactly, but the beginning of it. The sky above was clear for the first time in weeks. "Do you think Rex can see us?" Lily asked softly. David smiled faintly. "I think he never stopped watching." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Then, I'm not scared anymore." He looked down at her. This small, brave soul who had survived more truth than most adults could bear. "That makes two of us," he said. They walked together down the courthouse steps, the sound of camera shutters fading behind them. Somewhere above, a faint breeze stirred, carrying the scent of rain, the echo of memory. And if you listened closely enough, through the hum of the city and the murmur of the crowd, you could almost hear it. A single, soft bark. Not loud, not broken, but clear, as if a voice beyond the veil whispered one final time, "I kept my promise." The morning sky stretched wide and pale above the police academy grounds, brushed with the soft gold of early sunlight. The air was still, the kind of stillness that feels sacred, like the world itself had paused to remember. Rows of officers stood in quiet formation, uniforms pressed, hats held against their chests. A flag hung at half-mast. Somewhere, a lone bugle played the final notes of taps, low, mournful, and beautiful. In front of the academy steps stood a new statue, carved from bronze. It was strong, noble, full of life, Rex, captured in his prime. His muzzle lifted high, mouth slightly open as if mid-bark, muscles poised in eternal vigilance. The artist had captured every detail, the alert eyes, the proud stance, the sense of movement that made it feel like he could leap to life at any moment. At the base of the statue, a small plaque gleamed. Rex, K9 Unit 47, loyal, brave, never silent. David stood at the edge of the crowd, his posture straight, but his eyes distant. He wore his dress uniform, the black ribbon of mourning pinned neatly to his chest. In his hand he held a small badge, worn, scratched, the metal dulled from years of service. Rex's badge. Beside him, Lily clutched a bouquet of white lilies and blue forget-me-nots. Her hair was tied neatly, and though she was still small, there was something different in her now. Quiet strength. The kind that only comes from surviving heartbreak. When the ceremony ended, the crowd began to disperse. Voices soft, respectful. David and Lily walked forward together, their steps slow, deliberate, as if each footfall carried memory. They stopped at the statue. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind moved gently, through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain, the same smell that lingered in David's memory from that night. Lily stepped closer and knelt, placing the flowers carefully at the base of the statue. Her voice, when it came, was small but steady. "I heard you, Rex," she whispered. David felt his throat tighten. She looked up at him then, eyes glistening but proud. That day in the courtroom, I think he was talking to me, even if no one else could hear it. David nodded slowly. He was, he said. He always spoke to the people who listened. Lily reached out and brushed her fingers over the cold bronze paw. Does he know? That we're okay now? David took a deep breath, the kind that trembles on the way out. He knelt beside her, holding out the badge. He knows. Carefully, he placed it on the statue's paw, the metal catching a flicker of sunlight. He earned this more than anyone ever could. They sat there in silence. A man and a child bound not by blood, but by the same loss, the same love. Around them, the academy yard blurred into gold and green. David's gaze lifted to the statue's eyes, fixed forever on some distant horizon. He wasn't just my partner, he murmured. He was the reason I kept going, the reason I believed people could still be good. Lily looked up at him, her voice trembling. You were his reason too. He smiled, eyes shimmering. Maybe we were both just trying to save each other. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves. Somewhere nearby, a group of recruits paused their drills, glancing toward the statue. One whispered, "That's the dog, isn't it? The one who saved his handler, David, heard it, but said nothing. He didn't need to." Rex's story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone now. To every officer, every child, every person who had ever loved and lost and still found the strength to stand again. A gust of wind swept through the courtyard. The flag stirred. The leaves whispered. And for a heartbeat, just one. David thought he heard it. A bark. Soft. Gentle. Carried on the wind like a memory refusing to fade. Lily's head turned sharply. Did you hear that? David smiled faintly, eyes still on the statue. Yeah, he said softly. I did. For a moment, they both stood there, letting the sound, imagined or not, wash over them. It wasn't sad. It was full. Like a promise kept. A spirit set free. Lily leaned against David's side, resting her head on his arm. He's still watching, isn't he? David nodded. Always. He rose to his feet, helping her up. Together they took one last look at the statue, the sunlight catching the bronze muzzle just right, as if it were alive again, mid-bark, forever protecting. As they walked away, David turned one last time. The academy bell rang in the distance, its echo mingling with the wind. And somewhere deep in his chest, where grief and gratitude had learned to coexist, he felt peace, the kind that comes not from forgetting, but from remembering right. The camera would linger on the statue, light shifting, wind brushing through the trees, petals from Lily's flowers scattering gently across the stone. And in that stillness, the narrator's voice would rise, low and reverent, like the final breath of a promise kept, level strong. Some heroes speak with words, others with silence. Fade to black. Sometimes stories like this remind us that love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it just looks back at us with trusting eyes and a wagging tail. German shepherds, especially, carry that quiet courage that holds families together and protects what matters most. They don't ask for much, just our time, our kindness, and a place in our hearts. If you've ever looked at your dog and felt that unspoken bond, that moment when they just know, you already understand what this story is about. It's not just loyalty, it's love, in its purest, most selfless form. If you'd like to deepen that connection, there's a wonderful resource I found that shares ways to understand your dog's emotions and build a stronger bond together. I'll leave it here for you to explore, if it feels right. Because sometimes, the best thing we can do for the ones who love us most is simply to listen back.